About 48 million people in the United States have some degree of hearing loss. This is my sister Haley, and she is one of those 48 million. She's been wearing hearing aids since she was about 2 years old. Now, I've been thinking a lot about her during this pandemic, and how challenging it must be to communicate, especially now that people have to wear masks. I spoke with the CEO of the National Association of the Deaf, and here's what he had to say about some of those communication barriers.
I think, yeah, the deaf and hard of hearing community, we are hungry for information. We often do feel like we are the last to know.
That's the voice of Amanda Richter. She's an American Sign Language interpreter, and she interpreted this interview between myself and Howard Rosenblum, the CEO of the National Association of the Deaf.
And for those people who can hear fine with the help of a device like a hearing aid, the masks may not be an issue. But for those people who depend on lip reading, the masks pose more of a challenge.
And you know what? That's not the only problem.
For deaf people who use American Sign Language, that bars our facial expressions, because facial expressions are a huge part of language, and that's our grammar.
Especially at the start of the pandemic, he says there were major gaps in communication during press conferences where there wasn't always an interpreter.
Things were so uncertain, and no one knew how to protect themselves and what is the best course of action. Should we go outside or not? Are we in lockdown or are we not? And deaf people really didn't have access to that information.
And English isn't always the first language in the deaf community. ASL oftentimes is, and that's a completely different language. Chandra Manning and her team knew that something had to change.
In a situation like this where people are already isolated, and you take away that extra level of communication, man.
Somehow, some way, they had to figure out how to keep everyone safe but still get the message across. So they created this.
This material right here is actually a vinyl material.
Okay.
And there are 3 layers that have gone into this part right here that's the breathable part.
2 layers of cotton and a filter, ribbon, or elastic to hold it in place.
We have used heat to seal the vinyl so that there aren't any holes.
Because pandemic or not, the need for information will always be there, and it should always be accessible. Howard says it's really important to not assume that someone's ignoring you if they don't verbally respond to you. They simply might not be able to hear you. He says now pre-COVID-19, he would encourage people to tap him on the shoulder so that he would know that they were addressing him. But with social distancing now in place, that's really not an option.